All right, let's dive into some really fascinating history today. We're going deep with Revelation Book 1. And no, not the biblical book of Revelation. This is something completely different. This Revelation Book 1 is a manuscript book full of revelations, ones that Joseph Smith and other early Latter-day Saints received, starting less than a year after the church was organized. You can think of it as like a window into the foundation of the church, like a collection of the earliest copies we have of many revelations. And get this, some are even unique to this book.
Yeah, and what's so interesting about this book, it's not just a static record. It was used and constantly evolving. It was used to print the Evening and the Morning Star newspaper, and even the Book of Commandments. You know, it was really actively shaping the early church, almost like a blueprint, you could say, for their faith.
So it was actually being used. It wasn't just tucked away, making a real impact. Who were the scribes who documented these revelations?
Well, the main scribe was John Whitmer, one of the 8 witnesses of the Book of Mormon. And just for those who might not be familiar, the 8 witnesses were a group of men who testified that they saw the golden plates, the plates that the Book of Mormon was translated from. And to add to that, Oliver Cowdery, who's another really important person in early church history, he contributed a few pages as well. So just imagine these guys right there at the beginning, carefully copying from earlier manuscripts, which unfortunately we don't have those anymore.
It's amazing that we still have their handwriting connecting us to the early church. But it wasn't just Whitmer and Cowdery, right? There were others who added to it later.
Oh, absolutely. Later on, people like Sidney Rigdon and William W. Phelps, I'm sure a lot of your listeners will recognize those names, they came in to make additions and corrections. This adds another layer to this Revelation Book 1, highlighting how it really evolved over time.
Okay, so what did these early church leaders think was important enough to record in this book? What kind of content are we talking about here?
Well, Revelation Book 1 has 76 revelations in it, 4 other items, and entries dating from 1828 to 1834, offering us a glimpse into a very important time for the church.
76 revelations. That's a lot to unpack. I'm curious, was it all in chronological order? Or were there any surprises when it comes to how the book was organized?
Well, that's where things get interesting. The first 127 pages are pretty much chronological. But after that, it gets a little jumbled. There are items out of order, which actually gives us some clues about how information flowed between the early church leaders.
Like a puzzle waiting to be solved. But doesn't the jumbled order suggest a lack of organization? How does that fit in with divine guidance?
That's a good point. And it shows how humans played a part in all this, both receiving and documenting revelation. Maybe the chronological inconsistencies, maybe they were just a result of urgency. Like, for instance, pages 128 to 148. Those contain entries from December 1831 to April 1832. That was a time when there was a lot happening in Missouri. It's possible those revelations were added later, maybe brought by Joseph Smith himself, to address specific issues that were coming up there.
You know, it makes me think, am I as attentive to revelation in my life as those early saints were? They were actively looking for guidance, recording it, and using it to navigate their challenges. Do we approach revelation with that same diligence today?
That is a really important question. And Revelation Book 1 is a great reminder that revelation isn't just a concept from the past. It's woven into what it means to be part of the church. It's something that's applicable to all of us. And that brings us to what I find so compelling about Revelation Book 1. The overall message that runs through all these revelations, it speaks to the very core of what it means to be a Latter-day Saint, both then and now.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. What is that message? What were these revelations trying to tell those early saints, and what can they tell us today?
Imagine this. You're a member of the early church, facing all this uncertainty and opposition, trying to build a new life based on this brand new faith. Then, through these revelations, God speaks directly to you, offering guidance, comfort, and a blueprint for how to build Zion.
So it's a message of hope and direction in the middle of chaos.
Yeah.
Like a lifeline pulling them through.
Exactly. And it's a call to action, too. These revelations weren't just some abstract ideas. They were practical instructions for building a community, for living the gospel in tangible ways.
Give me some examples. What were some specific things they were told to do?
Well, there's a big emphasis on gathering, coming together to build Zion. Remember, this was a time when saints were scattered, facing persecution. These revelations called them to gather in Ohio, then in Missouri, to create a place of safety and unity.
So it was about creating a physical place for their faith, a community where the gospel could flourish. But you said earlier that gathering wasn't just about location. There's a spiritual element to it as well, right?
Absolutely. It was about uniting their hearts and minds, too, creating a community bound together by shared beliefs and covenants. They emphasized building temples, establishing sacred spaces to connect with God, and to receive ordinances that would bind them together. And just as important was this focus on economic unity, sharing resources and helping those in need.
So they were trying to build a society that reflected their beliefs, based on love, service, and sacrifice. Sounds almost utopian. But how does this idea of building Zion, which was so important back then, how does that resonate with us today? We're not facing that same kind of persecution or the same need to gather geographically.
That's the amazing thing about these revelations. The specific instructions might have been for that time, but the underlying principles are timeless. Building Zion, creating a community of saints, united in purpose, striving for righteousness. That's an ongoing process. It requires effort from all of us, no matter the time or place.
So Revelation Book 1 isn't just a historical artifact. It's a guidebook for how to build Zion today, both within our communities and within ourselves.
Precisely. It makes us ask ourselves, how are we building Zion in our own wards and stakes, in our families, in how we interact with others? Are we creating unity, lifting and supporting each other, living the gospel in a way that transforms our lives and the world around us?
It makes you realize that building Zion isn't some future event. It's something we're doing every day, trying to create a more Christ-like world, starting with ourselves, moving outward.
And that's where personal revelation comes back in. Revelation Book 1 shows us the power of seeking divine guidance. It reminds us that we have access to that same inspiration, just like those early saints did.
So Revelation isn't just for prophets and apostles. It's for everyone, to guide our lives, our decisions, and to help us build Zion.
Exactly. Revelation Book 1 is powerful proof that continuing revelation is real, and it's just as relevant today as it was back then.
It makes me think about how we study scriptures. We often focus on the history, the facts. But maybe we should also be asking, what does this teach me about receiving personal revelation?
That's a great point. And it connects to something really remarkable about Revelation Book 1, its impact on the scriptures we use today. This book, with all its revelations, it was taken to Missouri, which was a really difficult journey back then, so it could be used to print the Book of Commandments. Imagine that. This book, traveling across the country, carrying the Word of God to a new frontier. It was a physical representation of the church's dedication to spreading the gospel and to laying the foundation for Zion.
Wow, so this book helped shape early church doctrine and practices, and it actually became part of the scriptures we use today. Incredible. It seems like Revelation Book 1 had a huge ripple effect, one that's still felt today. But what happened to the book after it went to Missouri? Did it just disappear?
Not at all. Revelation Book 1 had a long-lasting influence on how the scriptures developed. In 1835, John Whitmer brought the book back to Kirtland. And guess what? It was used as a source for the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants. Think about that. The revelations we study today, the ones that guide us and help us understand the gospel, they can be traced back to this one manuscript.
So Revelation Book 1 is like the ancestor of the Doctrine and Covenants. It really shows how important it is to study these early sources. They help us understand how the church was established and how its doctrines have evolved over time.
Exactly. And it reminds us that revelation isn't a one-time event. It's a constant process. It started with the revelations in Revelation Book 1, and it continues today as we seek personal revelation and try to align our lives with God's will.
It's amazing to see how Revelation Book 1, this single manuscript, had such a lasting impact on the church, like a tiny seed that grew into this huge tree of faith, branching out into the scriptures we have today.
You know, what I find really inspiring is that this book isn't just about historical events. It's full of principles that are just as important now as they were back then. Ongoing revelation, the importance of gathering, both physically and spiritually, the call to build Zion. These are all timeless truths that we can apply in our lives today.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that studying church history isn't just about the past. It's about drawing strength and inspiration from those who came before, learning from what they went through, and applying those lessons to our own lives.
Exactly. Revelation Book 1 is like a testament to the power of faith and how important it is to seek God's guidance. It shows us that God is still speaking to us, still revealing his will, just like he did with those early saints.
So if someone were to walk away from this deep dive with just one key takeaway, what would you want it to be?
I'd want them to see that Revelation Book 1 is so much more than just old writings. It's living proof that revelation is an ongoing thing. It's a tangible reminder that God is working in our lives. And he speaks to us through revelation, just like he spoke to Joseph Smith and the others.
It's comforting, in a world that feels so uncertain, to know that we can turn to God for guidance, that we can receive personal revelation to help us through life's challenges. But how do we do that? How do we make ourselves more receptive to it? Revelation Book 1 came from a time of big changes and uncertainty for the early saints. They were really looking for direction, and God responded. Do we need to be in that same desperate state to receive that kind of guidance?
That's a really good question, and one that I think a lot of us have. While it's true that trials can make us turn to God more earnestly, personal revelation isn't only for those times of crisis. Remember, Revelation Book 1 also talks about everyday things, organizing the church, building communities, strengthening families. These weren't necessarily answers to huge problems, but more like guidance for creating a Zion society. It shows us that God cares about every part of our lives, and He's willing to help us with both the big and small things. I think the key is to always be seeking, to make time for quiet reflection, and to be open to recognizing God's hand in everything. Maybe instead of waiting for moments of desperation, we should try to live in a way that we're always humbly asking, consistently seeking His will in everything we do.
Living in a constant state of humble inquiry. That's a powerful thought. It's a change in how we see things. Instead of waiting for a big sign, we're always looking for guidance and recognizing those little promptings from the Spirit.
And as you keep exploring Revelation Book 1, I encourage you to look for those little patterns, the themes that keep coming up, the specific ways those revelations helped the saints. Ask yourself, what principles can I apply to my own life? How can these revelations help me understand the gospel better and strengthen my relationship with God?
It's like we're figuring out a code, unlocking secrets from the past to understand the present and future.
Exactly. And as you do that, you'll see that these revelations aren't just ancient history. They're still alive, full of power and meaning for us today.
Exploring Revelation Book 1 has been an amazing journey. It's made me appreciate those early saints even more, and it's given me a renewed sense of purpose and hope.
And that's the beauty of these deep dives. We can immerse ourselves in history, connect with the past, and come out of it with a deeper understanding of ourselves and our faith. It reminds us that we're all part of this incredible story of faith, connected across time by revelation, and our commitment to building Zion.
Well, until our next deep dive, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep the spirit of revelation alive in your hearts.